Aloha, I'm Terry George, and I'm the president and CEO of the Harold K. Castle Foundation. This foundation was founded in 1962 by Mr. Harold Kainalu Long Castle, the longtime owner of Kaneohe Ranch. He took a lot of his own wealth, both land and liquid assets, and he gave it to this private nonprofit foundation to make Hawaii a better place. And today, I'd like to share with you my own 20-year learning journey in leading the foundation to deploy flexible philanthropic capital to help improve our state's public school system. Since our inception, and nearly all of it since 2003 when I was hired, the foundation has made 352 grants totaling over $38 million to support K through 12 public education. I want to first acknowledge and thank the foundation's board of directors because they were the alakai in making the decision 2 decades ago to heavily invest in public education. And I want to thank our amazing staff, especially Alex Harris, who carried out most of the work. But my remarks and opinions are my own. My intention today is to let you peek behind the curtain of one private foundation's work in public education to see the risks we've taken, the mistakes we've made, the successes that we've had, and the assumptions that drove our work. But to give it to you in a nutshell, here's basically what the foundation has done in partnership with the Hawaii DOE and the UH statewide. Number one, we built a strong leadership pipeline. Number two, we've dramatically expanded early college. Number three, we've strengthened new teacher mentoring. Number four, we've raised teachers' voice in statewide policymaking. Number five, we built capacity for high quality project-based and INA-based learning. Number six, we've strengthened career pathways for students. And number seven, we built effective instructional leadership teams led by teachers in schools throughout the state. Our grants have funded technical assistance, training, evaluation, public policy advocacy, opportunities for peer learning, and support to spur innovations in teaching and learning. Now, foundations have a special place in the tax code, and when they use their highly flexible resources really well, they've made a huge difference in society. So you think of Carnegie's building of libraries in nearly every American city in the early 1900s, of Rockefeller Foundations pulling 1 billion people out of poverty through the Green Revolution, or of the Gates Foundation's work to advance cures for tropical diseases, or right here at home, the way thousands of young Native Hawaiians' lives have been transformed by Kamehameha School's provisions of scholarships for preschool and for college. But it's often hard to see what foundations do, in part because it's our grantee organizations, not us, who actually get work done and who deserve the credit. And it's also rare to criticize foundations, but because people want their grant money and they don't always see what foundations have failed to get right. But you know what? There are beginning to be some critics, particularly of what big foundations do in public education reform. And they ask us questions like, what right do these unelected entities have to secure such influence over the nation's education priorities? Such critics are now saying that many foundations fail to understand the true causes of underperformance in public school systems and that their solutions to these problems aren't working. With those preliminary thoughts, I'll let you know what we've learned and what we haven't along the way and what drives us. So this is one of my favorite photos. These are obviously graduates at UH Manoa, reminding me that graduation season is coming. It's a joyful time for families across our state. And imagine how many tens of thousands of lei will be strung and placed on the shoulders of our state's graduates, be they from the UH system, from Roosevelt High School, this is from last year, or from Windward Community College. So it is hopeful, but here's the story of social injustice in just a few slides. And this is what has haunted me and driven our foundation's work since the mid-2000s. These data come from the National Center for Higher Education Management Systems, which tracks the education pipeline for each state. And traditionally in recent years, for every 10 ninth graders in Hawaii, only 8 of them have graduated from high school, and only 4 of them then go on to college right away after high school, and only half of those get a college degree within 3 years for an AA or within 6 years for a BA. And, that's daunting. So we've decided to start doing some work on this. And you can see here that this is how it's broken out for the high school graduating class of 2022, where 51% enrolled in college, a third are working, but maybe they're doing well, maybe they're not. And then nearly 1 in 5 are not in school and they're not employed. And then you can see some quotes around this slide that are from some of our focus groups with high school juniors and seniors to get a sense of what they're thinking about, what's holding them back, and what's giving them hope as they move towards their own conception of success and a good job. Now, these data are just a snapshot, obviously, but clearly our system doesn't help all of our youth navigate this major transition from high school to college and into the workforce. And this is a social justice issue for us, and we felt we had to do something about it. After all, which one of you would be willing to tell these Kahaluu elementary students, this is from their wonderful program last spring, that half of them might not go to college and a fifth of them might not graduate from high school? Or are you willing to say the same thing to these Jarrett Middle School students, many of whom moved to Hawaii from Micronesia because their parents wanted a better future for them? For these reasons, in 2002, Mitch Dollier, then CEO of the foundation, proposed to our board to get proactive in public education, specifically to close the achievement gap between low income and other students. And the board agreed, and then I was hired a year later to help make it happen. So as we were beginning to do this work, we realized quickly that it's easy to be mad about this situation, but a lot harder to figure out why the system works so poorly for so many youth or what we should do about it. We got a lot of advice, and some of the bullet points here are some of the things that people advised us. But you know what? That reminded me of the ancient parable of the 4 blind men and the elephant, where each one was touching a different part of the elephant. The man who was touching the tusks thought this must have been a great curved post or spear. The man who was touching the side of the elephant thought this was a huge wall. The one who touched the tail thought it was an enormous rope. And so they each came to a totally different conclusion of what the animal must be. Same thing with opinions on how to fix the system. Get money down to the schools, give the schools more money, shrink the bureaucracy, get rid of unions, break the school system up into 7 different districts, get rid of high stakes tests, actually get better tests, have a longer school day in a year, have more school choice, empower teachers. So the list went on. And it's natural for us as humans to seek the simple solution, to find that silver bullet that will fix our schools and ensure each child who enters in preschool or kindergarten emerges a dozen years or so later on a clear, strong path to a successful future. But you know what? Our system of schools, which were established in 1840 by King Kamehameha III, is huge and it's highly complex. We're talking about 297 schools spread across rural, urban, and suburban areas on 7 islands, serving 169,000 students from all backgrounds, taught by 12,000 teachers with 29,000 other employees, a budget totaling well over $3 billion when you count all sources, with 3 unions, 15 complex areas, and on. Not to mention that half the students are poor, 10% are special education, and 9% don't speak English as their first language. These are not excuses, just reality. We need to serve all those students, no matter what their backgrounds, but it means that creating lasting change is hard. And so basically we stepped back and decided to ask ourselves 3 fundamental questions. And this is going to be the theme throughout my talk. How does good school change emerge? How does it spread? And how does it last? Because if we used our foundation dollars just to get something to emerge, but it didn't spread or it didn't last, it wouldn't be effective. So then we asked ourselves some more specific questions underneath this in order to better understand how we could invest. Standards. What do students need to know? Instructions. How do teachers work together to improve teaching? Assessment. How do we know whether students are learning what they need to know and do? And if they don't, What is it about the system that is holding these students back, and what can we do about it? Leadership, how to build a critical mass of the right kind of leaders, and accountability. So my conclusion, after basically 2 decades of this sort of work, is that the solution is all about elevating teachers as professionals and teachers as learners, and making student learning, quote unquote, irresistibly engaging, as the education thinker Michael Fullan writes. And it's also about teacher leaders, instructional leaders, setting a positive culture of high expectations, clear direction, and joyous learning. And it's also about making teaching, learning, and leading a group sport, a collective effort. Basically, this is the first of 3 phases of our grant making that I would sort of describe to you today. The first phase, for the first 5 years of our work, is where we really focused on the emerge side. How does good change emerge? It was a steep learning curve for us. You know, we did some scattershot grant making, funding those who came to us. But there was some very important work to grow strong leaders and build some critically important institutions like the Hawaii P20 Council or Teach for America. But we also had some failures. For example, we co-funded a study in Moanalua Complex with First Hawaiian Bank Foundation. We used an expert team from KPMG to do a business process analysis of the Moanalua Complex. And we found that teachers were wasting a huge amount of time on paperwork that the central office demanded of them. And it also gave specific recommendations that could create greater efficiency and free up more time for teachers to teach and to plan together. That report went absolutely nowhere, and no major changes were made as a result. But I wanted to tell you a story of courage and triumph of something that actually did work during that time, and it's all about Palolo School. I started to volunteer there with my Rotary Club just before I joined the foundation. Every Tuesday for 2 hours, I would read to kids there. And I met this amazing leader named Ruth Silverstein. She was the principal of the school, and the school was failing under the No Child Left Behind federal mandate to make adequate yearly progress in reading and math. And when I first met Principal Silverstein, she was in tears. She was ashamed that reading proficiency was at 10%. And her school was basically going to be taken over by a turnaround company called Edison that was being paid $500,000 a year by the Hawaii DOE to get test scores up. But instead of giving up, Ruth decided to double down and learn everything she could from Edison. She also stared down a few teachers who said, "What can we do? The parents don't care if their kids go to school or not." And she looked them in the eye and said, "We are going to teach every single one of these children." And Ruth started going to the homes of the students to urge their parents to make sure their kids went to school every single day. And that really dramatically turned around that school. Its reading scores dramatically increased. And not only that, Ruth then decided to transform the whole school around a theme of global sustainability. And so kindergartners started learning all their science and social studies through the essential question of how do rainforests work and what role do they play in making the globe a better place. 5th graders were working on alternative energy solutions that might work so that we can get off fossil fuel. That led us to wonder, this story from Palolo, we wondered what other schools are really moving the needle on 3rd grade reading. So working with the DOE, the UH, and the Teachers Union, we actually created a data process that found nearly 20 elementary schools who are also dramatically increasing reading proficiency over the previous 3 years. And we honored them, and some of the principals are here in this slide, with awards, and we studied how they did it. You know how they did it? Groups of teachers owned this as the highest priority problem to work on. And then they decided just to focus on that and work like crazy on reading improvement by adjusting the way they taught reading to kids and to give extra support to kids who were behind. Not rocket science, but really important. That led us to some lessons on how change emerges and how it takes hold, how it spreads, and how it lasts. So we found that this outside-in picture or top-down picture of focusing on what's wrong, scripting one-size-fits-all solutions like No Child Left Behind, giving orders, rewarding and punishing, keeping the pressure up, Doesn't always work. In fact, it doesn't usually work. So instead, we learned over time that really this inside out, sort of bottom up approach worked better in most circumstances, where you really create a shared purpose. You unleash curiosity, not just by students and teachers to try new ways of addressing things, building on bright spots, rapidly trying new things, and then adjusting as you go and expanding the ones that work. And we have used that over and over. And I think that that inside out approach really influenced our next phase of grant making from the next 8 years that I would say would be characterized by this word, making good change, not just emanate, but spread. So we also, though, use this period to not waste a good crisis. Remember when we had furlough Fridays back in the dark days of the Great Recession of 2007 to 2009, when the DOE had to cut its budget by shutting its schools to kids every other Friday? So that tight budget situation made the DOE very eager to apply for special race to the top monies from the federal government. But that money came with major strings attached. Hawaii's first application failed, but under the new superintendent, Kathy Matayoshi, and Deputy Ron Nozoi, they were determined to apply again to try to use this to drive change. I jumped in, I asked my board for $200,000 for a Hail Mary pass to partner with 3 other funders to kick in dollars so that we could be the only state to write our own race to the top proposal without any help from big bucks funders like Gates Foundation. I asked to be seconded to the DOE for a month to help them with the application, and we won the award, which is great. However, a year later, almost none of the money had been spent. I called a quiet but urgent meeting in LA at the annual Grant Makers for Education conference, where I pulled together all the Hawaii funders in the US Department of Ed. We all decided we needed both help and keep up the pressure. And then I remember that later that year, I went to a Teach for America national meeting in Washington, D.C. And I was weeping when John Legend was on the stage singing some inspiring song, because I was thinking we're just not doing enough here at the Harold Castle Foundation to close the achievement gap. And on the plane home, I wrote my board a hard-hitting memo and saying that after 10 years and $10 million of public education reform grant making, we just hadn't moved the needle enough on closing the achievement gap. In that memo, I laid out 2 choices. We could either turn our tail, declare failure, get out of the field of system-wide public education reform, and go back to making safe grants to strong private schools. But the second choice was to double our grant making in public education redesign over the next 4 years, publicly commit to that doubling, and focus it on building a robust leadership pipeline from teacher leaders up to complex area superintendents. Thankfully, the board did not fire me, and they chose option 2. And we announced it at a televised press conference at Royal School with the governor, superintendent, and board of education. And this created a shot in the arm just when the DOE needed it the most. And again, it wasn't about us. It was about helping to turn the tide and making stakeholders believe that Hawaii could pull this off. But there were failures along the way. And pardon me, back to this slide. For example, teacher evaluation didn't really work to improve teaching during the race to the top period. But other things did work. And one thing that did not only spread but last was a new way of assessing how schools were doing. Rather than just looking at No Child Left Behind, reading, math, and science proficiency, they also looked at change over time, movement over time, whether kids were chronically absent or not, whether or not their 11th grade ACT test scores were predictive of whether or not they'd succeed in college, and how the achievement gap was being narrowed or not being narrowed. And the new teacher mentoring program, which we invested in heavily during the race to the top period, is still going strong. This is a slide that's only 6 months old, presented by the Leadership Institute of the state of Hawaii. And it shows that there are 500 plus active mentors mentoring 3 times that many beginning teachers throughout the islands, which is really, really great. And then I wanted to go back to where we've moved since then. When Alex Harris left the Hawaii DOE to join the foundation as our program officer for education, we started to focus on building career pathways for low-income students. And I would say we built that work to the last, over the last phase of the last 6 years, really, and to provide some tough love here and there. We've also had some setbacks, but we did this systems mapping effort that I'll discuss in a minute. And we really spoke the career pathways work into existence with other partners. And sometimes you just have to fail until you succeed, as I'll describe a little bit with college and career counseling. But we did during this period really dramatically expand dual credit programs to dozens of high schools. We increased tenfold the number of high schools with career academies, and along with other key funders such as Stupski Foundation, the Hawaii Community Foundation, the Weinberg Foundation, and the Chamber of Commerce, we've helped this speak into existence a whole new way of looking at student success called career pathways. And through these efforts, we and our partners have effectively smashed college into the high school students' experience and linked career into both high school and community college. Well, first we had to do a deep analysis of what a student's journey were like. So we did a systems mapping exercise, and here's a snippet of it. Not the system as you want it, but the system that exists today to try to identify what's blocking students from achieving the success that those high school juniors and seniors shared with us when we did these focus groups. And then we redid our strategy, focusing on what a student's journey is like from high school into 4 choices, basically, in a community college, a 4-year college, a trade union apprenticeship, or military service. And as Corbett Kalama really spurred us in a board meeting, he's one of our board members, he said, essentially, I don't care whether kids graduate from high school or college. I care about how they're doing when they're 25. Do they have an engaging job that's meaningful for them and that earns enough to feed their families? So we really spent the last 5-6 years building this new field at the intersection of K through 12, higher education, and employment. And it has these 4 main areas of investment: academically rigorous career pathways that involve career exploration via work-based learning, accelerated learning through those dual credit early college programs. And that leads to a degree that holds real value. Supporting students who really need help in guidance and moving towards college and beyond. Work-based learning, so helping students to expand career exploration activities. And then industry-led partnerships to really use labor market data to identify high growth occupations such as healthcare, skilled trades, engineering, IT, and others. Here's an example where sometimes you just have to try and try again until you succeed. So we've continued to work on this, but this is a snapshot from the first 4 years of half a dozen different efforts to try to improve counseling in the state of Hawaii for students from grade 6 all the way through community college. And that work continues. But then the pandemic hit. And we had to toggle in that year and the ensuing years from 2020 through 2022 between crisis and strategic response. So we provided grants for academic tutoring, outdoor learning spaces. We were opportunistic. We found a great trainer that can help to train teachers in how to do distance learning well. But it was really tough. And basically, during that period, the Department of Education and the UH was consumed by health and safety. And so we really had to slow down on our work. And there were major headwinds. There were tensions between the Board of Education leadership, the Department of Education leadership, and the legislative leadership, not to mention the governor. Lots of absences, urgent basic needs, but there were tailwinds, which was good. So we've had $450 million in pandemic funds going into schools, which is great. And no one was fighting against career academies or career pathways, which was wonderful. And we worked fast and went all out in the Windward side, offering full first-year scholarships to every Windward public and charter high school graduate who enrolled in Windward Community College. That dramatically increased enrollment there. So moving away from the pandemic, we saw some progress, as I mentioned. People were applying for financial aid through the FAFSA form, which is a great indicator whether students are really high school students are going to enroll in college. Dramatic increase in the number of seniors taking dual credit programs while in high school. And that was a wonderful change in our ecosystem. And now, in the past year, we've seen greater stability and alignment. We have strategic plans now for the UH system, the Department of Education system, and Hawaii P20 Council that are really focused on the kind of learning and the kind of career pathway preparation that all students are going to need in the future workplace. Budget's looking fairly strong. As I mentioned, we've made good use of these one-time federal funds. But staff had a really rough time during the pandemic. Students had lots of stresses there, so there are mental health issues that we really need to deal with. And we've therefore shifted a little bit of how we've worked. One of the things that I wanted to share that's really been a bright spot for us is investing heavily in INA-based education and project-based learning. After all, why are our schools designed as if we could live in Poughkeepsie? They're buildings with closed doors for the classrooms, whereas the best classrooms there are the wetlands, the marshes, the trails, the lo'ikalo, the fish ponds, the coastal areas. So like many other funders, we've invested in a growing number of nonprofit organizations and students and schools and teachers to really use the INA as the classroom. And it is this irresistibly engaging learning that we just love. So what's next for us? We looked as the work was really emerging and then scaling and then lasting in career pathways. We felt like we could take on something else to advance more student supports. And we looked at these three options, decided that helping students enter middle school and then emerge from middle school with a strong sense of themselves, with good basic academic preparation is really important. So we've started a new middle school strategy, and it's really a wonderful thing to see that the State Department of Education is also developing its own strategy to elevate the importance of middle school leadership and middle school teachers. Long term, I think there's also a story that this national test called the National Assessment for Education Progress tells about Hawaii. So when we started our work in this test, which you can't teach towards because you don't know which students are going to get it, it's a random sample of students in each state taking the same test to get a sense of what states are moving the needle and what are not in 4th and 8th grade reading and math. We ranked towards the bottom in 2003. But look at how our ranks moved to the middle and even higher than the middle by 2022. That is cause for celebration because not all of those other bottom dwellers in 03 moved up the ranks as did Hawaii. And yet you can see that the proficiency rates are still low for Hawaii. So we still have work to do and the achievement gap is still there. Nonetheless, I feel like we've made progress, and we've also got this lasting data system now at Hawaii P20 and elsewhere that allows you to identify, for example, in the middle column here, schools with similar socioeconomic characteristics of their students, in this case, the percent that are economically disadvantaged, that have higher levels of high school seniors enrolling in college. So now we know which schools the other schools can learn from, which is really something to celebrate. Really in closing about our strategy and what private foundations can do, if you want to be a salt in the stew for education as opposed to a drop in the ocean, we feel like we really need to figure out how adults in the system learn and change and become courageous. How culture has changed over time in schools and how school leaders can change that culture to a more positive one with higher expectations for students, higher supports for students and teachers. We learn to think big, fail fast, and learn all the time, and stay focused and persistent when change is going to take time. We learn to use other tools rather than just grants to convene people, to help people travel to other schools where they really are moving the needle. By partnering with others and collaborating with other funders in the K through 12 field, by not wasting a crisis like Race to the Top or the pandemic, and to know when bottom up is the way change emanates, when top down makes sense, for example, with higher graduation standards, or side to side, such as the instructional leadership team's work. And sometimes you just got to fund the unsexy stuff, data systems, training, planning, and evaluation. But I think really there have been significant improvements since 2003. High school graduation standards are much more rigorous. High school graduation rates are now measured by more honest measures than before, and they've risen and stayed high. Hawaii's academic standards are fewer, higher, clearer, and far better aligned with what students actually need to know and be able to do post-high school. The percent of freshman UH students needing remedial math and English courses has fallen significantly. School-level academic planning is more focused and evidence-based. Nearly every first and second year teacher in the DOE has access to good mentors. Schools have learned better how to partner with nonprofit and business organizations, particularly in high school career academies. I mean, my high schools have those career academies now. They offer industry exposure, industry certifications while you're a high school student. And nearly every high school student now has project-based learning opportunities and can take college courses for free while in high school. The UH system is better at partnering with high schools and is better at welcoming first-generation public school graduates and steering them through to a degree. So there's a lot of progress. And here's a photo of some of the adults who have been leaders in that progress and partners with us in funding public education. I just can't thank enough the teachers of the world. And you can see a teacher here in the back of the room with these young people, but teachers have been central to all of that progress that I just shared. And when you see a teacher next, please thank them and encourage them to remain in the classroom. And I also wanted to end with a photo of these youngsters. These are who we're doing all this work for and what we've been doing for the last 20 years. Our children in Hawaii deserve our best because they are our future and they only get one chance to get through our K-12 system. So let's give them all the love and support that they deserve. Mahalo for the chance to tell a little bit of the Harold K. Castle Foundation's public education journey. I hope you enjoyed it. Aloha.